do you consider yourself a planner, or do you operate on gut feeling and go with the flow? And I have to confess, as I ask that question, it sounds ludicrous to me to even ask it of you. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, but I think there might be a little bit more nuance to that. So yeah, no, I am a planner. I do plan things out. I think things through. I backtrack, and yeah, so I am definitely a planner. But I do often go with the flow when my plan is to go with the flow. So there are often situations where I'll just decide that, yeah, no, whatever, yeah, let's do something and we'll just see what happens. And I'm happy with whatever outcome. And so I do, it is not that I have to have a plan. But I do need that clarity of like, if we are pretending to have a plan and we don't have a plan, then that makes me nervous. But if the plan is to just go with the flow, I'm comfortable with that and often excited about it. I do think interesting things can happen if you just go with the flow.
So you're a fan of scheduled recreation.
I mean, if you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous, but I guess maybe that's accurate. Yeah.
Are you a planner, or do you generally prefer to go with the flow, or are you a gut feeler?
Well, I mean, I think that depends on what you. I would say I'm an extreme planner. I like having everything organized. I hate when things are disorganized. And sometimes I say I trace this back to going to Catholic school, because I went to Catholic school for 8 years as a child, and it's very structured and rigorous, and everything's on a schedule. And I think that's good. I actually think all kids should go to Catholic school, get some discipline and organization and structure. And I like that. And even when you're writing a paper, I don't hate pulling all-nighters or anything like that. So I like students. It's like, get me a draft. I think you guys even said you do a schedule now, or you have a lot more students than I do. But it's just because once you have a lot of things going on, it just becomes chaos if you don't have structure. So I would say I like having everything planned out clearly and having structure. I mean, like I said, but then within that, there's like these hour meetings, which are totally open, right? And then there's time for brainstorming and doing things that, those meetings aren't planned, but within everything else, the larger structure is.
Yeah, I remember one time I had asked you to submit a letter of recommendation for me. And
I said, don't send me reminders.
Yeah.
It's on my to-do list. You're just wasting my time, because if it's on my to-do list, it will get done because I went to Catholic school.
Yep. Those were your exact words. Yes. Okay. I imagine that the answer to this next question is pretty clear for me, but for the sake of completeness, do you struggle with procrastination?
I would say no, actually. Again, everyone tries to put certain things off, but I like staying on a schedule and getting things done.
And I think I know the answer to the next question, or at least I thought I knew the answer to the next question from the Danny I knew from a few years ago, but you can tell me if that's the same. Are you a planner, or do you operate on gut feeling?
I mean, in my natural environment, no. I don't want to, I don't know, if it's a social event with a bunch of people, then I will make plans, and that's kind of required to coordinate. But in my free time, I don't like to make plans. I would much rather just kind of I don't know, go take a walk with my wife and go through the city and see where we end up and see what we do, as opposed to making any particular plans. That said, part of the reality of working is that I am heavily dependent on my calendar to tell me what to do and when. So I don't know, as sort of.
So perhaps not an enthusiastic planner.
That's right.
Are you a planner, or do you operate more on gut feeling and you prefer to go with the flow?
Totally gut feeling. I don't really plan. I don't actually keep even the to-do list. I tend to, trust my instinct and the memory, which, it does fail me once in a while. But one of the reasons why I don't plan out is that I just find it really difficult to motivate myself when my to-do list, or I have a list of the things that I know I have to do that I don't enjoy. So I tend to just, let them just float around in the background of my head while I'm focusing on all these things that I like. And then whenever I feel like, okay, so this is the time I really have to spend maybe an hour doing all these uninteresting stuff. And then I kind of randomly pick up those things from the background of my mind and then start working on that. Yes.
Interesting. That would also explain the going to bed and still ruminating through the what else was remaining.
That's a good point. I never thought of. I never made the connection, but it actually does make sense. Yeah, I think there is a reason why I have that least favorite part of my hour of the day right before going to the bed.
Do you consider yourself a planner, or do you operate more on gut feeling and go with the flow?
Actually, I'm more of a planner. That's usually, yeah, I have like plan A, B, C, D, and in case something goes wrong, I follow another plan and so on. And among my friends, I'm famous for having a bad luck. So I always plan based on the worst case scenario. So and then I have other plans that. And if worst case scenario doesn't happen, so I'm happy that so I switch to another plan and do that.
And is that finding backed by data? You actually do have bad luck, or is that just
yeah, it happens. I don't know, like so, or maybe maybe I'm exaggerating, but my friends but it's all my friends know that. For example, when they want to buy a stock or something, so they ask me like, "What did you buy?" I say, "I bought these things," and so they don't buy it, so they buy other things. So that's.
Well, I mean, an anti-correlated variable is just as useful as a correlated variable.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you consider yourself a planner or more of a person who operates on gut feel and goes with the flow?
A little bit of both. I'm definitely a planner in the sense that I love organization. I love to think things through, but I'm totally fine throwing it out the window and doing something else in the moment if that seems better. And I think that I'm probably not actually just doing it on the fly. I suspect I've already thought it through, just maybe not quite as consciously.
Reminds me of the quote that plans are useless, but planning is essential.
Yes, that's very much my philosophy. Though you shouldn't like at least in this profession, it's really hard to be too hard on the plan because things change so much. So.
Are you a planner, or do you operate more on just gut feeling and going with the flow?
Oh wow. I think it's almost a cliche around my teams that there is a plan, but it's in Andrew's head and it doesn't get put out. I'm very much into contingent plans or conditional plans, right? So in fact, I guess one of the things I'm proudest of is that someone wrote a book. Bill Buxton, a user interface designer, wrote a book, and as one of his chapter heading quotes, he used a quote of mine, which is sadly inaccurate, but it's kind of right, which is the concept that making a plan and sticking to it guarantees a suboptimal solution. Right, because you're just using the information you had at the point of time that you made a plan, and so it doesn't guarantee, because of course you could have been right, but it's pretty much guarantees. It's a bound on
especially in a dynamic world.
Exactly, which hopefully you're in, right? Because if you weren't, you weren't doing interesting stuff. I mean, there's a whole bunch of quotes about plans. What is it? No plan survives contact with the enemy. Etc. etc.
No battle plan survives contact with the enemy, and plans are useless, but planning is essential.
Exactly. So that last one. So you really have to have an idea, which is what's going to happen. But it's also a few years ago we did a proper plan. So we were doing 3D modeling, and we were doing hand tracking for the HoloLens. So we had, a small CPU, a tiny CPU, like an Apple Watch size CPU. and we had some code, and we knew that was probably the code that was going to work, but it was 1,000 times too slow. And we then, I remember we called it the 39 steps. It was a beautiful, I think it was John Taylor, Tom Cashman, a few other people in my office on a whiteboard. And we wrote down all the code that we hoped we didn't have to write to make this work. So there's like, and then each of those things that we thought we might, we called it 39 steps, right? There were just stuff like, do we need to implement a Cholesky factorization that understands the sparseness in the bottom 16 by 16 of the matrix? Because it's like such a hassle, but it was going to be a 50% speed increase, maybe, but was it going to matter? And then every column was sort of P0, P1, P2. So it was, we're almost certainly going to have to do this. We're probably going to have to do this, and we really hope we don't have to do this. And it was just an amazing matrix. And then we added it all up, and it was like, holy smokes, there's 25 person years of work here. It was that was after we multiplied by 10, our estimates. And I haven't gone back, but we weren't far off. And sort of 3 years later or 4 years later, the thing got released. And yeah. So what's the answer there? So the answer is planning is such fun. And I guess what I'm terrible at, what I'm really bad at, is scheduling, not planning, deciding who should do what when. I'm terrible at that. I'm always like, okay, well, what's the next thing we need to do?
Including yourself, you find yourself difficult to schedule according to the plan that you just made?
I don't properly, I mean, it's interesting as well when you're doing, if you got a product release, that's fine. You kind of pick a date, and especially with HoloLens, there's hardware as well. So, it's all very, some people who really, really are scheduling are working over there, and you have to fit in with them. So, you just make that work. And, as any computer vision person will know, when there's a paper deadline, magically stuff gets done by the paper deadline. But sometimes we're in a mode where it's almost like journal paper mode, right? So it's a bit like it's not going to go in the product until it's proved. And that really is just deliver it when it's done. I find that really hard to because what I want to do is, I'm also super keen that I don't believe in 80-hour weeks, right? I really believe in, you work at a rate that you can sustain, as long, and you love it. So it is interesting to try to plan those sort of no deadline situations. And I think it's no secret that I'm not very good at it, but luckily I've got people around me who are better at it.
Are you a planner, or do you operate on gut feel, or do you go with the flow?
I think both. I feel that when you're a researcher, you have to go with the flow at the same time plan. Go with the flow means that you really need to adjust, how you're working, how you're feeling. You want to attack a problem, ideas that you might have, both because you read archive papers, or you see something that you have not seen before, so you want to adjust everything. Or because your experiments show that things don't work. So in that regard, I try to be very flexible, and not be very set in stone with an idea. But at the same time, I try to plan very thoroughly, especially things when collaborating with more junior people, to give them some sort of structure and goals and what they need to achieve. And especially when you work at a company, maybe not a lot of people know this, but planning is sort of a part of a lot of the things that we do, especially when we work with people that are not primarily and purely researchers, but engineers who need to exactly know and allocate their time. And I think that's also good for me, to be honest. So I try to adopt a lot of these things that we do as part of a bigger group when you work in a bigger team, and do it also for myself.
Are you a planner, or do you operate largely on gut feeling, going with the flow?
Yeah, when you said, are you a planner, right? Of course, immediately thought of
Robotics.
robotics, motion planners, and so on. Hmm. I don't think I'm a planner, but I'm trying to grow into one, kind of. I think, yeah, I think after talking to people, I realized that there's some disadvantages to not having a at least long-term plan to life. Though also, what's the point of planning, because everything is so uncertain and so on. But but I'm trying to grow into a planner. I'm not a planner.
Are you a planner, or do you operate more on gut feeling and you go with the flow?
Probably people around me will say I'm very much of a planner, but I also have a tendency to jump into things without thinking about it, because I think if you let me, I will overthink everything, and I don't like that, because I think it's a waste of time in some sense. So I guess I'm also, I don't know what the alternative was, but I think sometimes a planner, sometimes spontaneous. I think it depends. I'm probably more a planner.
Do you schedule spontaneity?
No, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. But also a terrible idea, I suppose.
Yeah. Can you see that working for you? Can you see?
Yeah, this is not quite spontaneity, but I sometimes go to the window and step away from my computer so I can think. So I guess that's scheduled spontaneity in some sense. I just let ideas come to me.
Are you a planner, or do you operate more on gut feeling? Do you just go with the flow, or do you have a strict set of steps that you're usually following?
I think I'm more of a gut feeling kind of a person. I think I definitely think that's true. Yeah, I'm a bit compulsive, a bit. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think there's certain things that I plan out, but I'm for work related things, I think I'm a bit more of a planner. But for like home things, like let's say what we're eating for dinner, I tend to have a very let's say low patience on terms of like, okay, if there's something and I have an idea in my head about what I want to eat, it's going to be in the next few days or else. Yeah, so so I'm more of a gut feeling kind of person, I think. Yeah, that's fair.
Are you a planner, or do you operate more on gut feeling, go with the flow?
I am. This is one of these things that I think is a fascinating question, because I think it is I think it's super. It's a super subjective answer. So I have this question. I have some version of this thought a lot with other people. I consider myself to be pretty easygoing, except when I'm hanging out with easygoing people who think that I am a pretty intense planner. So so
does the converse happen? Do you find yourself hanging out with planners who think you're just a slacker?
Right. So in particular, my wife thinks that I am a complete airhead who doesn't keep track of anything. So it's yes, I think it's sort of, it's one of those things where I think we all have other people in our lives who are more or less structured than us, and then and so we're trying to find our space. I have aspects of my life where I feel like they have to be messy, and I think creative things are like this. So like this desk is a total mess. It sort of just has to be. If this was organized, I feel like I wouldn't be able to get anything done. But then there's other places which are incredibly organized. So like I was noting that I have a spreadsheet which lists every single responsibility that I have to do with day level countdowns to all of them. And then I have a row for every student, and there's a column. It's like a Google sheet that's set up. And so then every weekly meeting, there's notes that are filled in for that. We add another one, and then we can see how things are progressing or not progressing through time. And when deadlines are met or changed, then they get moved into the archive section of the sheet. So then I can then do a look back and see what things were actually. So like, there are things that are like super crazy organized, and then there's like creativity, which I feel like sort of can't be. And so it kind of depends on what aspect my life we're dealing with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are you generally a planner, or do you operate more on gut feeling and go with the flow?
I'm more on the intuitive side, but I think it's a skill that you develop over time and out of necessity. I do keep a pretty regular calendar. I generally have an open calendar. My students can book time whenever they need it, and I mostly don't think, I just go to the next meeting. But I mean, I really appreciate people who can strategize and plan out their day the day before, or plan out their non kind of collaborative activities, but I am not really able to do that very well.
I mean, in some sense, the once you've outsourced your meetings to a calendar, the point of doing that is that it liberates you, then in that you don't have to actively think. So I can see that.
Yeah, I love actually meeting with people. I hate planning for the meetings, so it's often that's the barrier, not the actual meetings themselves. I've heard arguments of other forms, but I find that to be the nice way of doing it.
For what it's worth, scheduling this with you was simple because of your public calendar. So.
Oh yeah, there you go. And I work part-time these days at Hugging Face, and they are a startup, obviously, and so they have very different meeting styles and meeting schedules than academia does. And so they have a pretty anti-meeting culture. And so kind of bouncing between those two worlds of like when it's okay to schedule, when it's not okay to schedule, I think is interesting. Generally, though, I do prefer the anti-meeting style to kind of just planning a regular meeting every week that's going to eat an hour of your time.
Are you a planner, or do you operate more on gut feeling and end up going with the flow?
I try to plan because otherwise I think the juggling fails and I drop too many things. I can't say I'm perfect at it. I certainly haven't risen to Debbie's level of organization, but it's aspirational.
Are you a planner, or do you operate more on gut feeling and go with the flow?
I think I'm an obsessive planner. I wouldn't want to give the impression that I'm one of those people that's really organized. I like unexpected things, and I like sometimes being a bit obsessive, being a bit impulsive. But just planning seems to be just a pastime of mine. Like I'm always piecing together possibilities into the future, and of course that's good and bad. So I think I unroll the search and discover and like preempt some problems. So that's probably good. It's also just generally, I think, reasonable reasonable strategy for thinking of ideas. But it's also bad if it gets out of control. So, you can come across as someone who's not always in the present, or is overthinking or ruminating about things all the time. And that's definitely something that can happen to me if my mind gets into an unhealthy state, working too much, or just generally worrying about what might happen. So I think from time to time, I practice things like meditation. And I think one of the effects of that is to inhibit my tendency to plan. And I think generally I'm happier when that happens.
Procrastination.
Oh, I missed the start of that question. Sorry, Drew.
Do you struggle with procrastination?
I don't think I struggle as badly as some people with procrastination. I don't want to say that I've never experienced it. I definitely do. And actually writing is perhaps the hardest thing, especially we don't do that much writing relative to some research areas, I guess. But I've been trying to write a review article, and if someone has ever written a book, which I haven't, I imagine it's even worse. I feel some procrastination there. But generally speaking, I think my anxiety basically inhibits a lot of the procrastination by just making me constantly fearful of wasting time or something. So I don't procrastinate, but it's not necessarily for good reason. It could, it's also because I'm not at ease, and so yeah, that's kind of how I feel about that. And actually at home, I think there's probably a bit more of a tendency to procrastinate because in those spaces between the meetings, because I really envy people who can take that 1 hour slot between the meetings and really, just say, I'm going to use it. I switch on to my own work between that, and then I go back to the meetings. I can get something done, but it's never the whole hour. It does take me time to ramp up and ramp down. Yeah.
But do you think those people really exist, or they're sort of these mythical creatures who we think are out there?
Drew, I've always suspected that Devi is one of those people. So, but that's partly because she's actually very good at communicating about methods for like doing better at that, right? So yeah. I don't know, you could tell me.
So she's definitely good at context switching, and she's good at focused work, but she also does not like fragmented days, and so she is extremely possessive and protective of her calendar, and so she will just decline meetings ruthlessly. You can see her get visibly upset if her meetings are running longer into the day, where she just won't have the time to actually catch up on work.
But that's good. I mean, I think being disciplined about it is part of the solution. Yeah. And another thing, I guess, maybe this is going off on a tangent, but declining meetings without worrying. I think we all. I don't want to suggest that some people are like more empathetic than others or something like that, but I often worry about what signals I might have sent to somebody by a certain response and things like that. So even if I do decline a meeting, there's probably still a little bit of work being done in declining the meeting, especially if I have to write a note to explain why. So then I'll worry about the note and things like that. So I think the solution to all of these is just to be so busy that you don't have time to think about anything.
Oh yeah. Are you a planner, or do you like going with the flow, operating with gut feeling, or do you like things structured and scheduled?
Okay, that's an interesting question. In the long run, I like plans. I don't like sort of just doing things and seeing how they would end up. I like to understand in which context we are working and what are we working towards. So in the long run, I really like a plan. In the short term, I don't sort of specifically, I'm not very strategic in terms of I'll do this today and do that later. But I do think that there is some structure that is needed for the purposes of discipline. But my sort of calendar and diary sort of enforces that discipline on me. So I have very little, at the moment, very little time for procrastination, which is good. So longer term, I'm definitely of a planner, but in the shorter term, I'm more like, let's see how it goes and how things are.
Are you a planner, or do you go with the flow, operate with gut feel?
I did as I think you may know, I did my PhD on planning under uncertainty and reinforcement learning. Mm-hmm. And that is probably like a Freudian thing to fulfill a personal gap in my abilities. Maybe AI will make my way of acting in the world a little better because I'm not a great planner. I think I don't know if I'm a go with the flow person either. I don't know what I can say I am, but I usually have kind of a high level sense of goals and aspirations or kind of general things. And I'm not very good at necessarily breaking that down into the pieces of details until I kind of have to. So maybe I use kind of a hierarchical planning approach, top level abstraction, and then the rest is kind of a greedy algorithm to get through the day or the life.
Well put, well put. Do you consider yourself, or do you operate as a planning person, or do you prefer going with the flow, with gut feel, where you have an intuition for things?
Well, you can only plan plans, you can't plan outcomes, right? So having said that, I tend to think of myself as a planner. In fact, so I applied to one place as an undergrad because that's where I wanted to go. I applied to 3 places for grad school because people told me I should apply to more than one place. But I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a computer scientist when I was 8 years old. I knew where I wanted to go to school. I knew I wanted to be a professor before I got to high school. Now, to be clear, I didn't know what any of this meant. I just knew that's what I wanted. And I tended to know very sort of early on what it is I wanted to do many, many years out in the future. It wasn't until I was a junior in college that I realized this wasn't true of everybody else, that people switched majors and were searching around for what they wanted to do. I didn't realize that until relatively late. I think a lot of people, when I tell them that, think, well, that's really, you're very lucky, that's very amazing, and so on. And there's some truth to that. It is nice to be sure of what you want and to be able to work towards it. And that's the sort of planner side of me. On the other hand, it does have some downsides. And the main one is you tend to live for the future as opposed to the present. So, I know the thing that I'm doing is going to set me up to do the thing that I'm doing, and therefore I'm doing the thing that I'm doing. But for that reason, and I'm waiting for the day when I don't know what I want to do next, because I get the feeling I'm not going to know what to do with myself, because I'm always doing something for 2 steps down the road. And I don't know what life is like without it. So the answer is yes, I'm a planner. You react to things that are going on as they're going on, because, no plan survives contact with the enemy, right? So you have to be able to adjust. But yeah, the high order bit is, I'm trying to make it work for this next year and the year after that. And that's just sort of how I operate. Things must make sense. It must be predictable.
And are they general?
No, but I mean, you can usually make things make sense. And you can often predict in broad swaths, and you can plan for those things. And so long as you are flexible, it sort of works out. So I'm a planner through and through.
Sounds good. Are you generally a planner, or do you operate more on gut feeling? Do you end up going with the flow?
The second, probably. I mean, I try to have a to-do list, which I pay attention to. But I mean, if there's a deadline, then I will try to behave. But yeah, I don't know, like how some people, I think, like you also be very good at time management by any chance, but I'm not a role model for that. Or rather, let's just say there are hopes for people who are not very good at time management.
Yeah, that's the positive spin on it. Yes, that is correct.